Hello, and it is 2 minutes past 12, and I know that we've still got some people joining us, but I think there's much that can be said about the topic that we are going to be talking about today. So hello and welcome to today's session, where we are looking at the importance of customer empathy in the contact centre. And I'm Lee Hopwood, I'm the CEO here at the CCMA, and we're all really aware of the impact the pandemic has had on how we think and feel. And through our research and from talking to our members, we are seeing and hearing how changes in behaviour is impacting the contact centre operation. Now, this isn't a session about the pandemic. In fact, I challenge our guests not to mention it. But it is about how and why customer empathy is important now more than ever. And I'm delighted that Five9 has supported this debate, this conversation today, and I'm really looking forward to inviting Brian Atkinson, who is the VP of EMEA at Five9 later, to share his summary at the end of this conversation. So Brian has a long career in contact center solutions from his time at Cisco, and it will be fascinating to see how he summarizes this conversation. But for now, please welcome our guests. First, I'd like to introduce you to Martin Hill-Wilson, who probably needs no introduction. Hi, Martin.
Hello, Lee. Hello, everybody else.
And Martin, you're going to lead the conversation, which is great. Martin is a renowned commentator and a consultant in the contact center industry. You see him all over the place. He's got much to say. And at the moment, Martin is also leading on our Building Empathy with Customers training workshop. So delighted to have you here, Martin.
Thank you very much.
And joining Martin are two people that have got as much to say about this subject as Martin does. The first is John Bowen, and John is the Customer Director at Payment Shield. Hi, John, how are you?
Good afternoon, Lee. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm good.
Hi, John. So Payment Shield is an insurance company within the Towergate group, I believe. And John is incredibly passionate about providing brilliant, intuitive and empathetic customer service. And I think we'll hear some of that passion come out over the next 55 minutes or so. The second person I'd like to introduce you to is Tim North. And Tim is Head of Contact Centre Go-to-Market at Connect. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
And Connect is a communications partner of Five9, and Tim has been, he's got many years of experience in matching technology to contact centre needs, and you're really bringing the flavour of technology into the conversation.
Absolutely.
Perfect. In that case, gentlemen, I'm going to leave you to it. I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Martin. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to everybody, and really looking forward to this discussion. I'd like to get you all involved to begin with by asking you to share with us in the chat window what's attracted you to this topic, and also secondly, what would you hope to learn? And if you could do that over the next 5 minutes or so, we will keep an eye on that, and we will try and incorporate some of those themes during the course of our conversation. And just by means of a warm-up, I suppose, I'd just like to say I think empathy is certainly a trending topic. It's something I've recently been writing about, and I just thought I would share with you, if you were going to go and Google that right now, it wouldn't take you very long to find the following assets, which have all been turned into white papers. So for example, you can now read about Guide to Empathy in Customer Service, how to use customer empathy to get repeat business, create customer empathy map in 6 easy steps, consumer empathy, the new black for marketeers, or indeed leaders who lacked empathy struggled in 2020. So it's clearly one of those words that marketeers are very attracted to at the moment, and we are clearly gravitating to in terms of it meaning something. And one of my first reactions to it is to say, well, when a word gets used a lot, it tends to start to mean everything and nothing. And so therefore, if this is a topic which matters to you, one of the things I would very strongly recommend is that you come up with your own understanding, working definition of exactly what you mean by empathy. And I'll just give you one, not that I think it's necessarily the only way of describing it, but for me, it resonates because it says some of the important things about it. And I'd like to use this as the springboard for our first discussion amongst ourselves in terms of what we think empathy is all about. So for me, It is imagining another person's reality and being moved to respond to their needs as a result of that. Typically, we talk about it in terms of, sitting in other people's shoes. But for me, the bit that really matters is getting outside of my own head, getting into somebody else's space in a very vivid kind of a way, using my imagination. And then when I'm in that zone, seeing what it looks and feels like. And actually, it's action orientated because I'm moved to do something as a result. So for me, that captures some of the essence of what's important. John, I wonder, how does that sit with you, and how would you choose to frame it for yourself?
I'd agree with the subtext there, Martin. I do think it's about feelings, it's about connectivity, it's about understanding how your customer or the person you're interacting with is feeling and what's driven that feeling and that emotion. And it is for me really much about the connectivity, regardless from a customer service perspective. Even if you can't resolve the problem for that customer, it's understanding what's driven them and digging deeper than the fairly transactional conversations that a lot of conversations are. Everybody you interact with will have a different lens through which they're seeing stuff and are being influenced by different factors in their own life, and it's making that connection and responding well to that connection and having taken account of those feelings and being, as you say, being moved by them to do something is a fantastic outcome from an empathetic interaction.
So to make an obvious point there, I suppose we're saying it's something in addition to just the functional outcome that a customer's turned up for. It's all those other bits that make a difference to the experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Tim, how do you frame it?
When this was first mentioned to me, I went back to an immediate recent experience, and I always relate things to experience. I had an experience where I'd spent quite a lot of money renovating a house and a kitchen, and I had a problem with the tap that boils the kettle. The tap that's, I won't mention the brand, but and it leaked, and it didn't ruin, but it caused some damage to my lovely new kitchen. And the engineer came and said, well, I'm glad to say it wasn't me. It wasn't me when I installed it. He didn't quite say it that way, but he dealt with it quite well. But it's like, okay, so it wasn't you. So, well, I'm going to take the part away and we'll have a look at it. Okay, so I rang somebody up a few days later, and I was pretty apprehensive about this. I rang them up, and the lady immediately said, I got right through to the right person. That was number one. The next one was that she immediately said to me, I understand your problem, and I am the person to solve this for you. Whoosh, all of a sudden, the relation. She related to me. She is the person that can solve the problem. She knows how to solve the problem. So to me, she had the right attitude. She was empowered, I think, to solve it. And she had the processes and clearly knew what to do. And that, to me, just broke down all the barriers I had. I could give you other ones that have been where somebody's been a bit more aggressive with me, but they had the right to be, and they took control of the situation. So it isn't always about just being nice. No. It's about being empowered and knowing how to deal with it. And it's difficult. And the first word I would use is attitude.
I think you've hit on that really well by saying that it's first and foremost about connectivity, connecting to you, reaching out and then confirming that by saying, I am going to own this problem. I'm going to be accountable. I'm going to make sure this gets fixed for you. And I think that also, without asking directly, meets your expectation of the fact you're nervous. I mean, it's a good example of kitchen. It's one of those areas in life which are expensive. It's the heart of a house, and when it doesn't work, it's extremely distressing. So there's a high emotional content in that particular context, and that person instantly recognized how you must have felt and put you at ease. And I know when we talked about this earlier on, you said, maybe not yet fixed, but I do have full confidence as a result. And that's a real win in terms of how that gets connected.
It's not, but I do feel it's going to get fixed.
Yeah, so you're still confident on that too.
Yeah, I'm still confident on that one, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, we can continue, but the major point I think for people to consider is be clear for yourself what you mean by that. Choose your words accurately, use that as an opportunity, for your training, for your discussions, for raising awareness, and focus very strongly then on what kind of behavior enables that to be delivered. Right, let's move on to our next topic, which I think is a natural progression, which is to say, why is empathy so important at this point? I know Lee has banned us from using the P word, but you know, there are probably good reasons why this has bubbled up to the surface. I mean, for me, I have a sort of opposite reaction, which is to say, I'd be really depressed if it was only suddenly discovered after this amount of time that empathy mattered. So one way of answering this is to say, is there anything, you know, within the recent period of time, you know, over the last year maybe, or even slightly longer, that has brought this to the surface and now makes this much more important than it used to be? And I wondered, John, could you help us unpack this in the first instance?
Yeah, sure. I think a couple of comments on the chat might play into this as well. So, you know, the P word has definitely accelerated businesses' move to more digital delivery and digital solutions. And the natural extension of that for me is that customers will look to do the more transactional activity online. So the things they feel confident in doing, the things that are easy for them to do, they will quite happily embrace self-serve. So what you're then left with in the contact center environment is either, from a customer's perspective, either the highly complex or the highly emotional conversations or interactions that they want with a business, and that for me is where the requirement to focus even more on empathy becomes more important.
Right.
Because more and more conversations that our teams will be having will be in that high emotion, high complex. So to make that connection with the customer, to understand why they're feeling, as Tim was, nervous, why they're ringing, what their driver is to ring us, and to try and give them that reassurance. I think that's why empathy has certainly ramped up in the last 12 months. Also with the backdrop of, you know, the resilience of the population at large is a lot lower, I think, now than it was, as a result of that uncertainty, either from a health perspective or a job perspective. So people will flip into that emotional state for transactional activity that they may not have done previously. So being able to make that emotional connection and give the customer that reassurance is really, really important. And I think that's why we're seeing a big shift over the last 12 months.
In your context of insurance, what are those particular moments of truth where empathy absolutely matters?
I think there's a couple of things. I think the one that really strikes home for me is, you know, you'd like to think we're all experts in our own domain. So whatever we deal with, we're brilliant at. You know, I think that goes for everybody on the call. But actually, you put me in a domain I'm not comfortable with, like kitchens, and I'm not. So when I'm speaking to somebody who is the expert, I need them to recognize my lack of expertise and therefore my nervousness. And we've seen a lot of that in the insurance space in the first couple of months of the first lockdown, particularly. Our policyholder call volumes went up significantly. And a lot of them were about understanding their insurance more. They had time to understand it a bit more, which is a great outcome, actually. But I think that's, you know, that's one of the key drivers. And the obvious other one, although we deal slightly less with it, is claims. You know, we're a home insurance business, so our home claims have sort of reduced actually because more people are at home. But obviously the space we used to operate in, we used to do some mortgage payment protection insurance claims, which obviously had a life element to it. And I have no doubt for businesses who are dealing with that in the last 12 months, that must have been really, really challenging, even more so than normal based on the circumstances under which some of those claims were being made. We also deal with brokers. So our broker business, we had brokers who were basically losing their income because they couldn't sell the product because they were closed down. So that was quite a stressful time for them, giving them reassurance and giving them support. And we actually, a number of our teams, both in my sort of customer service teams and our sales teams, ended up doing a more mental health check-ins with our brokers and partners to support them through what was a very difficult time. And, you know, we'll come on to it in a minute, but there is a tangible business benefit of us doing that. It wasn't the reason we did it, but there's been a tangible business benefit of actually doing that activity.
Understood. Tim, anything else you'd like to add to what John's laid out?
I think the expectations have been growing for years before what we've experienced recently. I think it has emphasized it. But expectations have been growing for years since we started contact centers. Every time we've raised the bar, the expectation has been raised. But also what's raising it is, especially last year, living with an ex-teenager that's just come out of teenager, they have an expectation of privilege. And I think as a society, we've delivered ourselves more. Our standard of life has got so much better over the years. And I think our expectations have become greater. And the challenger companies have created a bit of another wave in that from an application point of view and a ease of use, ease of doing business with you point of view, these challenger companies made it easy. They've focused on easy to do business. So that set another expectation that customer service has to deliver an ease of use interaction with its customers. So I think all this is delivered it, and it is, and bringing in what John's just said about the fact that a lot of the ease of use has taken away the simple transactions, and assisted service is taking away some more of those simpler transactions, and what you're left with is complex and emotional. So I think that has all driven to the expectation.
Yes.
And it's interesting. You saw that. I don't. As Paul just mentioned, I can see all those chats coming up. I've picked on Paul asking about technology and home working, but there's also a trust thing. Does trust come in with empathy as well? And I mentioned that from a home working point of view. I certainly now am reluctant to give my card details to somebody over the phone, knowing they're working from home.
Mm.
So there's a trust thing there as well, which does relate between the two. The comes into empathy.
It does.
So,
Well, certainly, if you're saying that trust is a really vital part of a successful relationship or a transactional interaction with somebody, then being empathetic and understanding them and listening to them and making sure that they understand, you understand what matters to them, is all about building that trust. So yeah, absolutely, those two things connect very strongly. And in a more distanced world, more remote context, making that point of being able to trust somebody probably is becoming even more important at this point in time. And certainly we're all that much more anxious, and some of the psychology around that is dead interesting. That the old fight and flight part of our brain does lock you down into a much more suspicious standoff mode with other people as opposed to a trusting one. So I do think that there is probably, again, just a sort of generic reason these days for needing to reach out in a way that makes people feel comfortable and relaxed, right at the outset of the interaction. So I suppose that takes us to the next place, which is to say, so, what are the benefits of doing this? Because again, when we get to our point of discussion saying, well, how do we build it, develop it, nurture it, and support it? That, put another way around, says it's going to take time and effort and investment. So clearly that needs to be predicated on real benefit at the end of the day. And I suppose let's just do the classic and think about the three communities of interest here. There are clearly customers, why do they benefit from greater empathy? I suppose that needs to be answered. Then we should be talking, I suppose, about the people engaging and anything really from the advisor and also the support team, the team leader, the supervisor. Why does empathy matter there? And in fact, we might even spend a little bit of time talking about whether or not within the team, the experience of empathy is important if it's going to flow out to the customer, that old CX, EX part of the link and the chain. And then more generally, how do brands, benefit from being praised for being empathetic, and how does that translate into commercial and soft skill value? So again, John, would you like to sort of put your top ones out there that you think you can quite easily prove in your context, and you'd be quite happy to discuss with your sort of senior management teams as being, quite tangible and quite obvious reasons why empathy matters?
Yeah, I think I think there's just one other element to touch on as we think about this, which is, and it picks into Tim's point as well, so sort of apologies, slight divergence, but as the conversations that people are having become more laden in empathy and complexity and emotion, you begin to get, it's how your people deal with that, because they don't get the downtime of the easy conversations. And I think that's something that we need to think about as we talk about this. But I think from a benefit perspective, from a very pure, from a very pure customer perspective, it is what Tim talked about. It is that trust piece.
All right, John, can I just interrupt because somebody's got a whoop, whoop, whoop going on there?
Yeah.
Can we just mute ourselves? Wonderful. Was that you, John? Maybe.
I can still hear it.
Okay. Tim, can you hear that as well?
If John just goes on mute now.
Yeah.
Right, it's stopped.
It's stopped now.
Good. All right. Let's just track back up then to the top there, John, because I think you were saying some important things and it was a wee bit distracting. So let's go from the top.
So I think one of the consequences of both the home working and the stripping out of the more transactional activity is that colleagues who are taking the emotional or complex calls don't have that same downtime or opportunity to refresh, either because some of the calls become transactional so they can top their own resilience back up, or they haven't got their colleagues sitting next to them. They can just take a kickback for a minute and sort of share an experience if they've just had a particularly hard call from their perspective because of the emotion attached to it or the complexity of it. And I think as we come on to talk about how technology can support, I think that's a really important part of it. And how we remove some of those distractions. But going back to your initial point about the outcomes and the benefits, from a customer perspective, it is about the emotional feeling coming off the call or off the interaction. It's feeling that, as Tim did, that somebody's owning this problem for me. So my emotional state is lessened, is lowered. I'm less emotional, less stressed by an interaction. So I come away from that being reassured that what needs to be done is going to be done. And that, from a pure mental health perspective, is probably the best outcome that you can give a customer, as they don't have to worry about what they've wanted to do. I think from a colleague perspective, it actually enriches the role, and it probably sounds a bit glib, but actually having that opportunity where you feel even more expert and you're even more able to help people solve their day-to-day problems actually gives you personally some value or more value. It makes you feel that you've added to their day. So I think there's very much a personal benefit from a colleague perspective. And also, empathy is a really, really portable skill.
Yes.
You've got knowledge skill, and then you've got your emotion. You can teach anybody. I think you can teach both, but actually, going from insurance to retail or something else, part of it is about learning the product set and learning what that business does. But actually, the emotional skill will become more and more important. I think people will place a greater onus on that as a skill. So I do think it becomes very portable, and also it's very rewarding. And then from a business perspective, using the example I talked about, as a result of some of the work we did with our broker partners, particularly through the first pandemic, we ended up signing up 300 more brokers to submit business to us. It's probably been worth north of £250,000 worth of income to us in less than 12 months. And that's just basically some of our guys having people referred to them because we were already talking to other brokers about how we can support them. They sort of said, look, speak to Payment Shield, they look after you. And it wasn't a monetary thing, it was just having conversations. And some of our teams, particularly our sales teams, were talking to brokers at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, just from a how you feeling, checking in perspective.
Well, I know I worked with some of your team on that conversation, and in a very top level way, there is enough research out there to show the obvious, which is that if you end up feeling positive, literally positive emotions, you tend to want to engage more with the brand. Guess what? The negative is also, guess what, true, which is that if you feel upset and whatever, you feel less inclined. And eventually that translates into the way that customers, experience the brand. And there is no such thing as a neutral interaction. You're either adding or you're subtracting from that basic bond and that basic relationship. And those things translate, as John was quite rightly saying, into commercial opportunity and value. People will stay with you longer. They tend to be more open to new offers, or some of the other things that matter about customers, which is that they feel sufficiently positive that they really will advocate you. I know we talk a lot about NPS, but I think there's a big difference between a score and people being prepared to verbalize, their experience of engaging with you. So there are lots and lots of really tangible reasons why empathy kicks off a chain reaction of positive outcomes, which result basically in, I suppose you could summarize it in loyalty, which is a word that we often use. And I know, Tim, that was one of the points that you were emphasizing again from your perspective, that was the result of being a successfully empathetic brand.
Yeah, and when you look at it, I think, listen, I look at some of the questions and listen to what's being said. And from my experience, the first thing, of course, that's that should be easy to do is to get the right caller through to the right person who can deal with them. And then a lot of the people listening to this will have the influence over the attitude of that person. They may not have control over who gets to whom. They can certainly, that can be improved these days with the technology. But then the attitude of the person and the empowerment of the person, along with the knowledge they provide. I've not seen over the years. Many years ago, I got involved in knowledge bases. And a lot natural language knowledge bases. I'm expecting that to pick up now with the openness of AI and availability. I'm expecting that to pick up to help the agent, to provide them the information. But it is that you can't, technology can't help the attitude
No.
and the teaching of the person. And, you know, have they been in your experience, have they been their own customer? So in my instance, I'm talking about somebody who understood my problem. That was their role. But your agents, have they had the life experience of being one of your type of customers, and bring that to the party?
Yeah.
But that's natural, having that experience. And to a certain degree, that comes with age as well, because obviously you can't have much life experience when you are a lot younger. So I think that's really quite important in terms of so how you can help the agent.
That, for me, by the way, thank you for saying that, is why I emphasized, in the way I like to define it, the word imagination. I think it comes from lived experience to be able to imagine what it's like being that other person. And I would, to some degree, agree, yes, that, people who've got a broad and deep experience of things have probably got a bigger reservoir and spectrum to be able to connect to other people's problems and empathize in that sense, because they've got it, they've done it themselves, and they kind of know what that's about. But just sort of taking what we've just said and now moving into our last phase of the big question, which is how do we set those things up? And I think what we might want to do here, by the way, is to dig into some of the points that people have made, because I think it's been so rich. And probably John and Tim, you've had more chance to study than I have. I've been listening to make sure that I don't get distracted, so we can pick this up sort of randomly. But Tim, just to pick it up from what you've just said, I would say that as a key foundation stone, you have got to obviously set up the advisor and the team to express empathy, right? That's the most obvious point to make. For me, empathy as a skill probably begins with listening. No other way of looking at that. Contact center environments, traditionally, even at home, can be points of distraction. For me, the difference between hearing and listening is one simply of how much energy and attention I'm putting in. I can listen without really bothering to engage. It sounds like another claim, to John's point earlier on, and I'm sort of processing you. I'm getting you to the outcome. I've got my tick box. I've done all the things I needed to do. But the customer says, I don't feel I was really engaged. I don't think you really listened to me. I didn't feel you cared enough. And there's almost an invisible bond that happens there through the process of deep listening and complete attention. So anything that distracts from that gets in the way. And I think the point you made about knowledge management and a natural language, and I think increasingly we're talking about agent assist. I'd just like to call out those types of technologies that help us concentrate and not be distracted. And since technology is your thing, Tim, I wondered if you'd like to sort of explore some of the technologies that you think are supportive of me not being distracted by the complexities of getting the job done, but allow me to focus upon the customer need from a relationship point of view. So what are the things that I should be focusing on if that's my goal?
Okay. Right. The first thing I would say from technology point of view, it's no longer anything to do with IT. It's the contact center that should own any technology and use the technology. If the contact center owner, director, manager can't have a team under them that they see day to day when they do their reviews that is in charge of their technology, then they're going to have a problem, because they're not going to be in control. That's the first golden rule, I would say. The technology is now to be able to identify the caller and personalize the experience through different channels, using AI, using intelligent chatbots and voice bots, etc. That telling is there. It is really easy to use now. Once it's deployed and set up for you, that's really easy to use if you're in that position to be able to use that. So that's easy to use. Then using the same knowledge that's driving that to actually provide in your agent UI information is there available today. If you're able to do that, you might not have the budget. I can see people's questions coming up, and the question is, is budgets is another one. So it might not be the right cycle for you to be able to do that, but they are certainly there. If I give you my perfect scenario, though, as a consumer, not as a technologist, but in my scenario, ringing somebody up and saying, "Can you solve this problem X?" Bang. Yes, I can. I'm the person. This is how I do it. And dealing with that, having the information to be able to deal with that. But what we haven't talked about is follow-up, because that closes the expectation. That is when you've gone away and you've ended the expectation, how valuable was that interaction to the business? Now, maybe it's a low value, so therefore we're churning them over. But in this instance, it wasn't a low value. So I would welcome a follow-up to confirm the conversation. Let's face it, if we did it, Martin, we had a meeting, we'd follow up with a written confirmation. So is that an option for the business to be able to follow up, just a simple follow-up? Is that follow-up rather than via email, let's say, we ask the customer, what's your preferred method of communicating? Well, actually, I prefer XYZ messaging channel. I won't use a brand, but it could be different messaging channel. So take their mobile number and send them the follow-up via a digital channel and let them interact. And therefore, you've transferred them from voice into digital, if that's what you want to do, if that's what they want to do. So, maybe that's an option in terms of using technology to be able to do that. So when I'm following up on my kitchen, what I did last night actually is follow up on the kitchen via WhatsApp on what was going on. I got a response that they were going to chase it this morning, and I've not had a response yet, but I'm sure I will do.
Yes.
So I'm on another channel. I don't have to ring them up. Maybe that's not what contact centers want to hear, that they want people to ring up, but from a consumer point of view, I'd welcome the option to do it in a different way at different times.
I think that's really important. So part of it being empathetic, I suppose, is also to be sensitive to people's preferences in terms of how they, want to engage with us. But also, you've made an important point there about the ability to follow up and make sure things really are complete, at the end of the day. We talked a little bit about knowledge, and again, big fan of not having to go and hunt for that knowledge, and hopefully even have it proactively pushed onto my desktop. The other thing to say, I know it's a long-standing conversation, but should we just shout out also the difference between many, many screens open versus the wonderful simplicity of a single desktop? Is that still something that you come across in your consulting, Tim, as being something that, excuse me, people need to do?
It's not quite as bad as it used to be, but it is still a focus area.
Yeah.
We get involved a lot in migration to the cloud. Moving. A lot of organizations are moving their contact center away from their old equipment to a cloud solution.
Yeah.
And every single one includes integration. Just about, and some sort of data dipping, personalization. Just about every single one these days does. And the desktop is a lot simpler. There's a lot of ways of solving the desktop problem. So I would say that it is a lot better. There's no doubt about it, but there will be lots of users listening to this now saying it's not better for me. I'm sure there is.
John, let's talk then about the people side. Culture, in other words, how we incentivize, what we focus upon, what's the way that we do things around here. What do we need to sort of tweak to get a more empathetic culture?
Yeah, I think, and again, a lot of the chats about how do you enable people, and technology is definitely an enabler, but as Tim's rightly said, we can't all afford it. And I think for me, for the guys on the front line, or the guys and girls on the front line, there's two bits. It's about empowerment and it's about flexibility. So it's about allowing your people to step outside of your process if it's right for the customer. And don't let your poor processes be the customer's problem. You know, the really good advisors who show empathy will find ways of doing stuff. You know, if you're ever, and this goes back a while, if you're ever looking to re-engineer your processes, just go and talk to the frontline people and find out how they get around the rubbish that you asked them to do, and then just then bring that in, because that's what works. So it is about empowerment, it's about enablement. I know there's one of the questions or comments on here is about the fact that empathetic calls are longer because you're trying to build that rapport, and how do you balance that out with the whole, you know, budgetary piece. And I think using a measure that's been around for a while and has definitely got some traction in a lot of boardrooms around first contact resolution is almost using that as a stalking horse for having the right conversations, and demonstrating empathy means that customer will not come back to you about that thing they've just talked about. So actually you can use measures that already exist if it's not, because it's not easy to measure empathy from a, you know, put it in a balanced scorecard, really not that easy. But I think from a people perspective, it's giving them the chance, empower them, give them the chance to step outside your processes, and using technology to give them the headroom to be empathetic and focus on the conversation. So they're not worrying about the next technical question the customer's going to ask them in case they can't answer it. And it's about using technology to support the advisor to give them the headroom to do what they need to do. I think one of the questions was, can empathy be taught, or is it an innate skill? I honestly believe listening skills can be taught. I do believe empathy can be taught. I think we all need to help our teams by getting the noise out of the way so they can concentrate on the emotional conversation, and not being hamstrung by old metrics like average handling time, or the process says you do this, so therefore you have to do it this way. I think that's what it's about. It's about allowing your team to have a personal conversation.
Yes.
And
And
if you've got any technology, sorry, Matt, if you have got any technology, whether that be self-serve, is making sure there's a little bit of emotive language in that as well. So make it slightly more personal without trying to make it sound like it's a human.
Yes, well said.
I'll just throw a challenge in there around being empathetic. Does it make the call longer? I've had a number of calls from probably offshore more volume call centers where they've tried to build some rapport, and it's been frustrating. To me, you build the empathy by doing what I'm there to asking you to help me with. That's it. The nicety of it is come in when the agent has done the first element of the conversation, open it up, so understood the problem, and then while they're looking at systems, which is perfectly fine from a customer's point of view, they've got to look at systems, then they can build in some rapport building by relating to me, but not just saying how are you today, whereabouts in the country are you. It can be a bit false. So I think if it flows well, it shouldn't really take longer.
Well,
From a
conversation. I can just come back on that, because I don't think rapport is empathy.
yes.
The reason why it jars with you is because they're not recognizing your feelings or your emotion, or actually making a connection with you. So that for me isn't empathy. That's about the scripted "What's on Coronation Street tonight?" Have you seen it? Without wishing to go too far with it, it's about that. It's about having the connection. There's a analogy I've used to use somewhere else that I worked, which was called dancing with customers, and it's about matching what they're doing. So if they're trying to tango and you want to jive, it's not going to work. So it's about having the connection, understanding where the customer's coming from, their feeling, and responding accordingly. And that for me is true empathy. The rapport that you've talked about, Tim, for me is just here's a scripted way of trying to it's sheep dip. We'd all get the same conversation with that individual.
And that's the danger actually that Jessica's picking up with knowledge. She's talking there about in the chat about canned responses and how do you build empathy into email. Maybe it's actually that you let the agent type. Let them, maybe it's okay to let them make a few spelling mistakes. I know it doesn't look good, but the fact that it doesn't look like a canned response is quite powerful, but it's a dangerous tool. So that's an interesting one to throw out to you, actually, John. I'm picking up on Jessica's point.
So a couple of things that I've just noticed in the chat. So quite a few people are saying, how how do I do it? How am I empathetic? So I'd just like to put a few ideas out here. One is really, for me, empathy, the center of empathy is to say, I've got what you want. I got what your reality, what your experience is. So if you just take it in the context of your own life, when it matters that you understand another person and you're having a discussion, what are you actually doing to build up an experience of what's going on with that other person? And the answer to that is you bother to spend some time listening, you bother to spend some time asking questions to build a picture in your mind. So one of the techniques that is really useful is to make sure you really fully understood what matters to that customer. And good empathy sometimes is trying to establish what's not been said yet, but you sense is there. Sometimes you might be inviting people to tell more of the backstory around of it. Tim shared some of the broader context about the kitchen, and I'm particularly sensitive to that because it's one of the things I use in a training thing, which is a fantastic example of somebody getting a kitchen wrong, and it was tweeted in, and the response to the tweet was just, oh, don't worry, I'll DM me and give me the details, completely missing the emotional perspective of the fact that there was a botched kitchen, center of the house, probably very expensive, and a deeply, deeply upset person. It just skated straight over this person's head because they were in process mode, getting things done mode, as opposed to, you know, getting the experience of that person. So backstory and checking out. If you really want to make sure that you're on the same page as somebody, we spend lots of time asking confirmatory questions, just making sure that we've actually completely understood. Because at the end of the day, the goal of listening is to make sure that you have received a full impression of what that other person's saying. And as soon as you do any practice around of listening, you'll discover exactly how difficult that thing is, particularly if you have to do that call after call after call. So that would be the first thing I would say about empathy. It really is centered around the good practices of a good conversation, and breaking that down. There's bits that you can, you know, practice, the bits that you can learn at the end of the day, and always make sure that you spend enough time checking out throughout that conversation that you're on the same page with the customer, both functionally what they want, but also around those expectations. And the other question I'd like to address is the business of measurement. Jerry said, how do you measure empathy or know that you've been empathetic? Well, again, you know, I think the answer to that sits with the customer to make that judgment call. And again, some of your voice of customer might get tweaked to precisely that question, which is, you know, in terms of how you felt during the call, give me one or two words to describe that. So I wouldn't necessarily say, do you think we were empathetic? But I would say, how did you feel about that call? And the kinds of language that people will pop up will tell you whether or not you're in the zone of having matched their experience or not. And they will probably, if you haven't done, they will use words like disappointed, frustrated, don't feel I've been listened to, don't feel my problem was recognized, it was a struggle, you know, all those kinds of things at a human level. And those are, you know, the very opposite of what empathy is about. So it's perfectly possible to measure empathy and to build up a track record of how empathetic you are being in those times, you know, where it absolutely matters. Now, we're probably getting quite close to, we've got 5 minutes left. Tim and John, have you noticed in the comments and the questions any other points that you would like to address?
I think there's probably one, definitely, maybe a second one. So I think there's been quite a lot of comments. I think one of the things for me about empathy is you can't script it. So back to Tim's point about emails, about some of the questions about, you know, I think Lynn says she gets super irritated if somebody asks how they are in the first 30 seconds. That's the formulaic, that's people applying a formulaic approach to try and build rapport or empathy, and you can't script it. It has to be, every conversation is unique. And what you need to do is to enable and empower and train your people to be able to respond to the person in front of them, but also only concentrate on the person in front of them. So don't worry about the next call, don't worry about the knowledge, you are concentrating on the person in front of you. And I think the other one on there is about how does empathy and still can I help you square? I actually think if you show empathy, the sorry we can't help you on this becomes easier because you've displayed an understanding of the customer's feelings. And actually what you might find, and we found this on a couple of occasions, or more than a couple of occasions, you get to a point where as an advisor, you actually think what the business is doing is not right or fair. And actually you're prepared to champion that customer's gripe or whatever it might be into your business. And we've seen that a few times, and because we don't actually underwrite our own insurance, we've challenged our insurers on outcomes of claims based on an advisor's feeling that basically what we are doing to that customer fundamentally isn't fair because of how that customer is feeling.
Yes. The other thing I would say, because I've just also noticed a lot of people saying, how do we make it practically work, operationally? I would say that, again, the difference between listening and hearing is the difference between, turning up in the present and just being too rushed off your feet. And so some of the process of raising awareness around of this is to build it into your Q&A processes. And I think that it's always a very, very powerful and useful thing to do, to pick a random call and just sit and have the luxury of listening afterwards to whether or not you picked up all the clues that were going on during that conversation. Did you miss them? And if you did, what was going on in your mind at that point? Were you distracted? How were you distracted? Or didn't you even hear that particular clue? And it's a constant process of upping your sensitivity towards what matters in that moment to that other. And for that very reason, John's point is absolutely on the money. This is about an authenticity. It's not about a formulaic approach. And so there's something to do with, the way that you run the culture of the call center, the way that you're asking people to engage, and the way in which you're developing them, that allows empathy to be a natural byproduct of that. You certainly can't encode that in a script. Tim, finally, is there anything else that you've picked up that you think is worth calling out and you'd like to comment on?
I just imagine team leaders getting their agents together over a coffee and just talking about the type of interaction and how they feel it went with a customer, and where maybe the systems and processes that are creating that contact. And I think if they share a sympathetic attitude towards the customer, rather than a case of, they keep ringing up and asking these silly questions, that type of that attitude that you build, and the sharing over a cup of coffee could help start that process of understanding and being able to be empathetic.
And final rhetorical question is, if it's a very energetic process to listen and to empathize, and it can take longer, does that imply we might need to change the way we support people and not necessarily demand that they go straight on to the next call, which will put them into automated mode anyway, and they're probably going to miss the empathetic thing? So, John, you have to run centers or be responsible for people that do. Where's the trade-off there between the pressure of hitting the next SLA versus what we're talking about, the ability to be present and centered?
I think it's the you need to be able to demonstrate a tangible benefit to the business, to the board. That's just the way these things work. But actually, the sort of the improvement in your promoter score, the improvement in your intentional, your referrals, the improvement in your first contact resolution, all of those things actually build that slack in. For those of us been around long enough, the breaks that your guys on the front line had was always driven by how long they'd sat in front of a screen. Actually, that needs to tweak a bit now, and it needs to be much more about how much of your emotional bank account are you spending, and how do you top that up? And what does after call isn't about just doing the work that you couldn't do on the phone or when you're on the phone. It's about taking that opportunity a little bit to recharge yourself, and I think that's more important in the home working environment, because those brief minutes you might have talking to a colleague over a desk isn't there anymore. So it is about building it into the day and recognizing that there's a tangible benefit of that, but it's actually measuring the benefit so you can present the rounded case that says, we're doing this, but it's driving that net as a business. Do you know what? We're actually better off.
But just finally, however you seek to organize it, I think they do need to build in points of rejuvenation for people if you're going to expect them to put out that kind of connectivity with other humans. Lee, I think we're coming to probably a natural break point. So probably time to hand over to yourself and allow Brian to see if you can string together some logic from the conversation that we had so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, John, and thank you, Tim. That was fascinating and really lovely to see the comments that have been coming through as well, and drawing on what our guests are saying as well. And oh my goodness, how do you make sense of that? So, Brian, if you'd like to join us on screen, what do you make of that? Tim and I will disappear, and over to you to summarize.
Thanks, Lee, and that was very entertaining to listen to, and really gleaned a lot from it. And one of the things that came to my mind was that, one of my first experiences around empathy was when I moved to the UK almost 14 years ago. And it was an interesting experience because my flight was delayed. I missed a flight in New York, and then ended up almost missing my flight from Heathrow to Newcastle. And the flight attendant at the time, she took amazing care. She really listened to me, my struggles of moving from one country to another. And on that kind of interchange, when I was kind of interconnected flight between Heathrow and Newcastle, she actually said, I want to make sure you get, to your, at the time, my fiance, who was in Newcastle, I'm going to make sure you make that flight. And she put me on a private bus to transfer between the planes and actually catch that flight. So that empathetic experience really stuck with me. Now, the challenge we have is that was actually done in person. Really easy to deliver empathy in person. So much more difficult in today's world. And I think that was one of the key things that we're discussing is how do we deliver that empathetic experience? And if I try to summarize where things came from today, I think we start off with kind of the what, defining it. And, Martin kind of did a great job of defining what it is. And yes, we typically use the words walking other people's shoes, but I love Martin's conversation around imagining another person's reality. I mean, that's a very powerful statement there. Imagining another person's reality, but then yet feeling passionate to do something about it, right? And so to do that, I think you have to take a look at, what does empathy mean? And so, we really came across some really good scenarios there that it must be authentic, right? It can't be fake. It can't be something that's just a process, right? You can't put it into a process. It has to be real and authentic. You have to be able to coach agents that, you have to listen and not just hear, but listen. So that active listening component is really key. John was talking about being present. So we need to be really focused in on the specific conversation at hand, not about the one that we just had or not about the future one, but that specific one right then and there. The good news is it can be taught. Like that's a huge takeaway from today is that, empathy can be taught, and also that empathy can actually drive loyalty. So for brands that care about loyalty, that's a huge takeaway as well. And then just that kind of flexibility, right? Empowering the agents to be flexible so that they, don't have to stand in line in the process if it's going to cause an unempathetic experience, right? Break away from the process, give them empowerment to be able to actually provide that experience. I think first and foremost, defining empathy is really, really critical. If we look at the second point, it's around how do you integrate CX strategy into your organization? So how do you take those points that we just talked about and how do you integrate that into your strategy? And this takes me back to another defining moment in my career where it was October 2015 when I received passed my CCXP or Certified Customer Experience Professional certification. And you learn in that process that there's really 6 core competencies of a CX professional. And I think that one of the key things from my takeaway of this is how do you intertwine empathy into those core competencies of a CX professional? So all those things we're talking about today, right? A customer-centric culture. Where does empathy fit in a customer-centric culture? Where does empathy fit in organizational adoption and accountability, right? We talked about, using the correct metrics there, right? Accountability of, it's not about average, hold time. Maybe it's about first contact resolution instead. Voice of the customer, insight and understanding, truly listening to the customer during the call, but also even post-call. How do you create empathetic experiences? So experience design is another core competency of a CX practitioner. And then around metrics, measurements, and ROI, right? Kind of the six core principle of a CX practitioner. So I would encourage everyone that's on this call to kind of take a step back and say, what does my CX strategy look like? And in those 6 kind of key areas, how can we intertwine the learnings from today around empathy. So second point is doing that around CX strategy. The last one is really around technology is the enabler. And having been involved in the technology space in the UK here for the past 13 years, one of my key functions is to keep an eye on the trends. And we hear about migration to cloud, and I think that that's a really one that's overused, but we really experienced that this year with the working from home scenario. But the key thing that cloud gives you is really it allows you to remove those technology distractions. It allows the agents to be able to work from home with ease. And so from that perspective, we heard that today mixed in and out, right? Remove those technology distractions to be able to provide a more empathetic experience. We also heard empowerment of agents, so information to the agent's desktop. And that to me springs another trend called digital transformation. And what does that really mean? That really means to me that your backend infrastructure, your data, your business applications, those need to be integrated into the contact center with ease. And with technologies today around automation and data consolidation projects, we can easily not only have that single agent desktop, like that Martin mentioned that we've been talking about for 15 years, but we can get the right information to the right agent at the right time. Again, empowering the agents to have that more empathetic experience. Back to Tim's example with the tap, where that agent knew that he'd already had an experience, a bad experience. And then the last thing is really technology needs to have a human element to it. So from that perspective, implementing things that are kind of pre-call, right? So could we understand a customer intent prior to the call, whether that's looking through customer database, whether that's using some speech or some IVR, some automated speech to understand the tone of their voice, to try to understand the intent of that caller. Some real good steps around practical AI is really important. So I guess in summary, the way I would look at this is, again, understanding what empathy is. I think that the team did a great job of defining that today. I would take a step back and look at your customer experience strategy and figure out how to intertwine empathy into it. And then I would take a look at, how do you make technology provide a more human experience for your customers? So with that, Lee, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I think you summarized that incredibly well. Wow, what a great debate we've just had there. And I hope you've picked up all sorts of pieces of advice and experience that you've heard our guys say here. And I want to say a huge thank you to Martin for leading the conversation so expertly, and for all of the contributions that have been made by all of our guests. A huge thanks to John from Payment Sense. Really appreciate the insight you brought. And Tim, for your valuable contributions, obviously representing Connect. Brian, thank you for summarizing and making sense of what we've just heard over the last hour. And thank you, Five9, for supporting us and enabling this conversation to go ahead today. So really, really appreciate that. Please do check out our website for upcoming events, hosts of research and insights and courses and all sorts of things that we can do to help you be as successful as you can be in your role in the contact center industry. And please do have a great afternoon, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.